Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to Illinois Stories. I'm Mark McDonald in Springfield at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum. You know, as we go through this Christmas season, you're likely to see more than one Santa. They might be all over the place, but I guarantee you'll only see one Civil War Santa, and that's here at the Lincoln Museum. And here he is, Lee Schaefer. You're a local man. I think you live in Athens, don't you?
Athens, that's correct.
And you got into the Civil War thing so deeply that you actually built your own costume.
Correct.
Made it yourself.
Yes.
You and your wife.
That we did.
What possessed you to do it?
It was somewhat on a whim. My wife and I had talked about it, and I'm not sure whether she was probably the instigator of all of this. And I jokingly said something to Phil one day, would he like to have a Civil War Santa here at the museum sometime? And he was all enthusiastic. Well, we didn't know what the future would bring, so at that point I decided, and that was like at springtime of the year, so I just let my beard start growing at that point. So if he says yes, because I had to be okay through management, and so therefore I just let it grow, and I figured I could trim it later.
Would you slowly turn around for us so we can see your whole, just slowly turn around so we can see the whole items? A little faster than that. Go ahead. Yeah, there you go. Because we're going to be talking about how you came up with how you documented the fact that this is what Civil War Santa would have looked like. Before we do that, when the kids that come in the museum, when they see you, they know you're Santa Claus, right? But they know something's wrong. Something's not the Santa Claus they're familiar with. Isn't that right?
Right. They do. And it's very interesting to watch the faces of the children as they come in. I had one girl about 10, 11 years old a little bit ago from a school trip from Wisconsin. And she just wouldn't come close to me at all. She
didn't know about this.
She didn't know about this, no. But the others understood that it was just strictly Civil War Santa, and I was portraying a part. But she didn't know what she was getting into.
Let's start with the hat and work our way down. You've got the fur-lined hat, and it's rounded with a tassel on the top.
Correct.
Why?
Well, the hat altogether is really as close as I could make it to the Zouave soldier's hat, as well as what we see in Santa's hat on the sleigh that he's riding in the Harper's Weekly of January 3rd issue of 1863.
Okay, well, come on over here with me as we look at that, because that's going to give us an indication here about where you got your ideas. And here's Santa Claus over here, and we're talking about the hat now, and it's rounded with a little point and the tassel.
And a tassel. Now, the Zouave soldiers that fought during the Civil War had a variety of styles of hats. So I kind of picked as close to that one as I could find, and I ended up with this one. This particular hat, without the fur trim and without the tassel, actually came from Latvia. So the rest of the items, very few items actually were able to be found in Springfield.
Yeah, I'll bet.
They were mostly over the United States.
Yeah.
And but it was fun. It was fun researching all of this.
I'll bet.
In fact, I thank my wife for that because she did 99% of the research.
Now, let's stay with your jacket now for a minute. I noticed that you've got stars, and you sewed the stars on the jacket yourself.
Correct.
How did you determine? And was it from this that you determined?
I determined from here. Granted, you can't count all the stars. I mean, you can count the stars you see, but you can't figure out how many stars are on the other side.
Right.
So what I based it on was the fact that this is 1863, January 3rd. Okay, how many states did we have in the Union at that point? Well, at that time we had 34 states. So therefore, I figured there had to be 34 stars.
Okay.
One star for each state of the Union.
Okay. Now, we got to talk about these pants. I mean, this is just outrageous. How in the world? I mean, this just doesn't go together.
Well, depends on whether or not you enjoy wearing flags.
It is. It's the flag, isn't it?
It is.
It's the stripes of the flag, and of course, it would have had to be red, right?
Yes.
But you wouldn't know from this, but you figure it's got to be red.
No.
And the shoes are significant too.
And the shoes are significant because there are a few pictures.
Would you hold your pant leg up a little bit so we can see? Okay. There we go.
The style is of the brogans of the Civil War. And I chose most of the soldiers if they were foot soldiers, were wearing brogans. If they were on the saddle, then they were wearing boots. So most of the soldiers on foot were not wearing.
I
not
see.
wearing boots.
Okay.
So this is what he's talking to here are mostly foot soldiers. Some
Mm-hmm.
of these guys would have been in cavalry, but not altogether.
Mm-hmm. And this is, of course, lined with fur, as
with
Santa
fur.
would have been to stay warm. But you were careful about the fur you chose.
Chose very careful about the fur. It could not be expensive because St. Nicholas himself was one who was giving gifts, who was giving things to the poor.
Yeah.
Most of the time that was money to help the poor. And because of this remembrance of him, this should also be what Santa should represent.
I
here.
see.
So therefore, I should not be real
Okay.
lavish in what I trim.
So sheep,
coat.
which was common.
So sheep was common.
Okay, and it works.
And it worked very well.
Would you step behind the table for me, Lee? You not only share your costume, but you share some other knowledge and items from the Civil War with the kids when they come in.
Correct.
Which is a wonderful thing to do. I mean, because they may not have known how hard it was to be in the field during the Civil War. What a miserable experience.
Yes. I try to let some of them know how miserable it was.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the ways, and I didn't get it out of the bag down here.
Let me hand that to you. Wow, okay, now this would have been a bag that a soldier would have carried.
This would have
huh?
been a haversack that the soldiers would have carried. And in this haversack, I have another bag that we'll just take out of there.
Okay, I'm going to put this down now?
Okay, that'll be fine. And now that I'm looking for it, I can't find a whole one, but we'll settle for a half or whatever.
Oh,
We
goodness.
have pieces of hardtack in here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to let the kids have some idea of what it would be like to live on hardtack and coffee. And the fact that with coffee, they would have to roast their own coffee beans. They would have to crush the bean up, and then they would, before they could have their own coffee.
Yeah.
So if they lived on a portion of coffee and hardtack, it'd be very difficult.
Show us the coffee if you would.
Okay. The coffee beans are considered green coffee beans because they're not roasted, and when they're roasted, you roast them to the darkness that you really want. And we'll just pull some of these out of here. It won't hurt a thing.
Okay, green
And
coffee
we'll
beans.
just lay them here
Yeah.
to get a better picture of it. And so you can see that they don't have the brown or the black color that you'll see a lot of times in the grocery store. So they would have to take care of this in a skillet. And some of the soldiers, all they had was an old canteen that they'd picked up somewhere where they would split it in half and use that as a skillet for roasting the beans.
They had to do their own sewing, of
They had-
course.
If they lost a button or whatever, they
Yeah,
would do
they'd
their
have to
own
do their own
sewing.
sewing, and you've got little scissors, and you've got the needles and the thread there. Of course, that's for the hole in the socks
And-
there.
and buttons.
And look at this, it's a soldier's
And-
prayer book. Isn't that
And
precious?
sometimes they might choose to carry their prayer book in a container. They wouldn't all be having boxes like this, but there would be some that might have a box. It would also get to be a burden, so they'd probably keep it on a supply wagon with their name on it. But because of that, a lot of times they would put it in they have a breast pocket on this side of the sack coat or the frock coat, and that's usually where they would carry the soldier's prayer book. Some of them would carry it with them, others would just keep it, or maybe the others might ask for one from home if they've lost theirs.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing this with us.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I know the kids that come in here and the families that come in here through the holidays, I think they probably think you're a really neat addition to this.
Well, they seem to enjoy it anyway.
Thank you, Lee.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mark.
Well, we'll get back to the museum in just a moment, but in doing a little research for this story, I luckily stumbled on a collector of Civil War Santas, and it was, I'm doing the story next week and I run into you.
Who would have thought?
It's hilarious, but here you are, and we're going to show some of your collection because they're rare, aren't they, Civil War
They are
Santas?
very rare. I look for them, have been looking for them ever since we opened up the Passfield House, and I'm lucky to get one a year.
And you like it because it sort of matches the period, the Springfield period that you...
Well, it is. It's a significant part of the Civil War. That's when Thomas Nast really coined the modern Santa, and Dr. George Passfield was a surgeon at Camp Butler. So the scene that is very famous from Harper's Magazine is a scene of Santa visiting one of the Union camps.
You know, we've seen that earlier in the story, but I want to show it again because there's something we didn't point out here, Tony. The Santa Claus is sitting visiting the Civil War camp, but what's he holding?
Well, this is very interesting. He is holding, and it's very clear, identifiable, he is holding a marionette that is of Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederacy, and it has a noose around its neck.
Oh my goodness.
So somewhat of a symbolic gesture present to the troops, but he's also, they're opening boxes and they have socks and a number of things. I'm sure the Civil War soldiers appreciated that quite a bit.
It's Christmas time, you bet. Let's back up and take a look at some of these here. Let's show you your newest one first, because this is cool. You're always on the lookout, and here you go into a Hallmark store and you find one, huh?
I couldn't believe it. It's not the traditional Civil War Santa, but it obviously is an image of that with the short coat with the blue background and white stars, the trimming on the sleeves and collar.
I love the Statue of Liberty, too.
Yes, he's
Look at
holding
that.
a scepter with a Statue of Liberty.
Oh,
That's.
man, that is
I thought
so
he was
neat.
going to be a tree topper when I first picked him up. But
He's shaped like that.
yeah, but he's
too
a little heavy.
Some of these, I mean, they're all so different, which is what I find interesting. This guy, now he's got the dress, not the pants, and he's holding a drum. So, I mean, he may be going out to the field.
Yes, well, and it's paper mache. I mean, some of these are fairly heavy. Some of them are kind of stuffed material. You find them, I'll take them any way I can find them.
And the hats are so different. This tall guy back here, now he's really Uncle Sam, isn't
Yes,
he? I mean, he's a real patriot.
Yes.
And so is this one here, Uncle Sam again. But some of them are just pretty primitive. I mean, this guy here, he's heavy.
He's a toy maker,
apparently. Yeah,
apparently.
he's a toy maker, but look, he's got the Civil War. The Civil War look.
Well, I'm not choosy because there's hardly any out there, but there is one that is, I think, the closest image to the one that is in Thomas Nast's collection, and he's got the pantaloons, red and white stripe, and the coat, and the little hat.
That's right, Lee Schaefer, and the tassels on the hat, which Lee Schaefer said was in the drawing as well.
Yes, yes. So this is probably the closest one, but I think every creator of these used their own literary license, but somebody really looked to history and Thomas Nast.
And it's okay, this one belongs over here.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
There's no special.
Oh, there
order.
isn't? Okay, I love this one. Look at this guy. He's got thread and needle in his hands.
Sewing the
an
flag.
American flag. Oh, those are great. Well, Tony, thanks so much for sharing this with us. I bet your guests here at the Passfield House Inn, they get a kick out of this, I'll bet.
They do, and of course this will play after, but we have historic open houses, and we've got the place decked out for the holidays, and I get to only revisit my little Civil War Santa friends once a year. Don't make fun of me because I have dolls.
That's right. Thank you, Tony.
Boy, thanks. Thanks so much for coming, Mark.
We'll get back to Santa Claus in a minute, but one thing you can't miss when you're in the main hall of the museum is this immense Christmas tree. Dave Blanchett, it's just, I don't know how you put it up or take it down or store it or how you even decorate it, but it's just huge.
Well, in answer to one of your questions, it's in pieces, of course, and we store it in the back of the museum. But our staff puts it up, but then our volunteers, we have 500 of the best volunteers in the state of Illinois. They actually design and manufacture and purchase the ornaments, then they decorate it every year. And this year, it's a Dickens of a Christmas theme. So it's all about Charles Dickens and Victorian era ornaments. So as you can see, it's just a wonderful, wonderful effort. It just really puts you in the holiday mood.
When do they start working on this?
They work on this all year long. Just as soon as we take this down the first week of January, they start thinking about the next year's tree, and they start thinking about a theme and working on ideas for ornaments and tracking down the raw material for it. So it's really, really a year-round effort.
It's absolutely astounding, and I don't know how many volunteers you have, but every one of them must be involved because it's just a tree that size, to decorate a tree that size.
Well, of the 500 total volunteers, several hundred are probably involved in this. So yes, it truly is a volunteer effort. And of course, at the front of the museum also, as you come in, there's a small display that the volunteers do as well.
This is, I don't know, do you know how tall it is?
I do not offhand. It looks like at least 20 feet tall.
I'm thinking it's 20 feet tall, and I wouldn't even guess around, but I'd say something like maybe 20 feet around as well.
You know, I don't know for a fact, but it's in front of the White House here, and I think this puts the real White House Christmas tree to shame.
I agree with you totally. I agree with you totally. The nice thing about this tree is that man, you can use it again next year.
Oh, we certainly
Yeah,
can.
yeah.
It's very green, no pun intended.
It's
So-
terrific. It's terrific. Back to Santa Claus, okay? One of the exhibits that you have here during Christmas time, and actually this is the first year, I guess, that you've done this, is take a look at Santa through the ages and around the world. It's pretty cool.
This is a once-in-a-lifetime exhibit of historic Santa Claus figurines. Now, the figures themselves are not historic, but the characters they depict are. So it's Santa Claus through the ages, from the Middle Ages through relatively recently, the mid part of the 20th century. And it's from the collection of some private collectors who have really been collecting these for a number of years. And so for a couple of months around the holidays, we wanted to make these available to the public so they can see how the image and how the depiction of Santa has differed over the years.
Well, let's get started, because as I understand, there's a St. Nicholas and a Black Santa that are part of the exhibit.
Yeah, the figures that represent St. Nicholas and Black Peter are part of the exhibit. Now, in 245 AD, there was this guy named Nicholas who was born to wealthy parents. Now, he distributed his wealth to the needy, and because of that, Nicholas was given sainthood. Now, in his honor, 12th century French nuns began making annual nighttime visits to poor families, leaving gifts of fruits and nuts, and that was on December 5th, which was St. Nicholas Eve. You see how this is starting the legend is starting to build already. Now, in some lore, St. Nicholas was accompanied by a devilish servant named Black Peter, who punished naughty children, but was forced to reward the good. Now, as you know from today's observance of Christmas, they did away with the punishing the naughty children, and that's just pretty much a lump of coal nowadays, but the good children still get the gifts.
Right. The naughty children don't get punished, but they don't get good presents.
You better
That's
be
right.
good or you
lump
won't
of
get
coal.
presents.
That's right. So it's not punishment. It's just that if you were better, you'd get better stuff.
That's
right?
correct.
Okay. Now, during the Middle Ages, Saint Nick was depicted in a dark beard, and then, as I understand, after the 1300s, the medieval Santa then began to come on.
Yes, and we depict the medieval Santa, the 12th century actually. Now that varied a great deal among European and Asian cultures. Typically, this Santa was shown traveling on foot from house to house with gifts on his back. Now sometimes he was in the company of gnomes. He of course had the dark beard in the middle 1800s. But by about the 1300s, medieval Santa began to be portrayed with a white beard. So we're seeing how this is starting to metamorphosize already. The Mongolian Santa may have grown out of a combination of the Mongolian celebration of Herdsman's Day, which held similarities to modern Christmas, and the Christian ideals introduced to Asia by Marco Polo during his travels. So we're seeing as time moves on, he's picking up more and more of the characteristics that we know of the modern Santa.
Yeah, and then at some point, the Christ child plays into this whole fable of Santa Claus as well.
We call it the Christ child. The Germans called it Christkind, which means literally Christ child. Now, this was influenced by the Reformation of the 1500s, Martin Luther specifically. In an effort to break with the Catholic tradition of St. Nicholas, Martin Luther urged that the Christ child should instead be the bearer of gifts. So Christkind later became Kris Kringle of the Pennsylvania Dutch custom, and we all are familiar with the term Kris Kringle. Now, assuming the appearance of St. Nicholas, Kris Kringle is still popular today, and a Kringle figure is part of our exhibit here at the museum.
There are also additional European depictions of Santa, and my German's not very good, but Der Belsnickel is one of them, I think, of German lore, and that was represented, it looks like wearing a mask, maybe.
Der Belsnickel actually is how the Germans say it. It sounds better when you say it right, doesn't it? He was often represented as wearing a mask and bearing gifts for the good children and a bundle of switches to scare the bad. So once again, you've got the tradition of rewarding the good kids, punishing the bad. The Starman of Polish tradition is a more spiritual version of Santa Claus. Now, he travels to the homes of children and quizzes them on their religious knowledge before handing out the gifts. So you don't just have to be good, you've got to know something.
The carrot and the stick as well.
You can
Okay.
get the gifts. And then Father Ice of ancient Russian origin rewards kind children with gifts and punishes, once again, the misbehaving children. Although he doesn't hit them with switches, he turns them to ice. So the penalties are getting rather severe in the Russian custom. Now, his long white beard and sleigh led to his association with Christmas.
Okay, now I couldn't help but notice that you were good on the German, but you didn't try the Polish, and you didn't try the Russian, so that's okay.
I know a little bit of German. So.
I'm not going to try to pronounce those either. Now, there was a fella in 1822 named Clement Moore, who most Americans are familiar with because he wrote the poem that everybody associates with Santa Claus.
That's right. In 1822, Clement Moore, he was a theology professor, by the way, and an expert on European folklore. He wrote a poem for his children and a description of St. Nicholas as a fur-dressed elf riding across rooftops in a sleigh pulled by, here we go, 8 tiny reindeer.
Aha.
And we think we all know what this poem is, an account of the visit from St. Nicholas, but we know it is "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," and these are the famous words that everybody has heard around Christmas time. Now, influenced by this poem, in 1860, cartoonist Thomas Nast drew several versions of Santa, which were featured in the national newspaper Harper's Weekly. Now, one of those depictions is depicted by Lee Schaefer here at the Presidential Museum, and you'll see him in his red, white, and blue.
In fact, we
attire.
already have. We're very familiar with Lee.
Excellent,
Yep.
excellent. He's a dead ringer for the Thomas Nast Santa Claus. It's just wonderful to see him here. Now, Nast strongly supported Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, and he looked for an image that embodied goodness, righteousness, and the spirit of giving, especially to the Union troops who were far from home on Christmas. These drawings have inspired, of course, the image of Santa Claus as we know him today.
You know, and of course, commercialization always plays into everything. And when there's a dollar to be made, you can trust an American company to come along and try to get a hold of some of that. And in the 1930s, Coca-Cola used Santa Claus as a merchandising tool.
It's thanks to the Coca-Cola company that we have the Santa Claus figure that we now know and recognize today, the jolly elf with the red suit and the white beard and the white fur. That's because they wanted a marketing gimmick to sell Coca-Cola during the holidays, and they came up with this gimmick of the Santa Claus figure drinking Coca-Cola, being satisfied around the holidays. And that is what has stuck in the public's imagination ever since.
It really has, but people still put out milk and cookies, not Coke and cookies for Santa. You know?
Well, in our house, sometimes it's beer and cookies. But
Really? Well, you got a happy Santa over at your
Happy
house.
Santa. No, the tradition of milk and cookies, the red elf with the white fur, the sleigh with 8 tiny reindeer. We can see these pieces and parts that have developed over the centuries in the depiction of Santa Claus, and you can see how some of those representations of Santa Claus have developed through the years at our exhibit.
You know, it also makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is it still evolving, you think? Do you think Santa's going to continue to change through the years?
Well, I think he probably will. I mean, you might have images of a very fit and trim Santa Claus in keeping with the anti-obesity movement.
That's right.
You have the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, for instance. You have a depiction of Santa Claus that way. So there are certainly ways that Santa Claus changes a little bit through the years, but it always seems to harken back to the Coca-Cola Santa Claus of the 1930s. The jolly elf in the red suit and the white fur and the white beard who brings presents to good little boys and girls around the world. And by golly, if you've got to have a tradition, that seems to be a really good tradition to have.
I'm in. Thanks, Dave.
My pleasure.
If after this program you are still hungry for more Santa Claus, keep in mind that Lee Schaefer will be here the week after Christmas as Civil War Santa, and the exhibit that we saw will be here through January 2nd. With another Illinois Story in Springfield, I'm Mark McDonald. Thanks for watching.
Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you. For a DVD copy of the program you've just seen, send 1995 to Network Knowledge, P.O. Box 6248, Springfield, Illinois 62708. Be sure to include the program name, subject, and when the program aired. You can also order with your credit card by calling 800-232-3605.